Hello there and welcome. I am your guide on this exhilarating journey through data and discovery. My name is Michael, and today we get to answer a burning question about Africa. Are the Cardinals falling? What are these Cardinals I speak of? I'll get to that in a moment. In this project, I decode the pulse of Africa to understand the economic dominance of the nations in it. Why this project? Well, it's a project born from interest to identify financial opportunities at a high level and to gauge economic competition in my continent. From Kinshasa to Nairobi and Johannesburg, Lagos and Cairo, we're going to uncover interesting insights into Africa. Thank you so much for clicking to watch this video. This initial video here will cover the prerequisites that you need so that when we get to the actual insights from the analysis moving forward, you don't have to keep you can just have this in mind. So you can just essentially get this housekeeping out of the way. So here we've got an overview of what we're going to cover, so I won't dwell too much on this. I'll just go straight into the content of this preliminaries chapter. So here we're looking at a dance of dominance, and essentially how we're going to do this is first we're going to subdivide Africa into five regions. We're going to use what is called the United Nations geoscheme, and the geoscheme divides continents into regions and subregions on a statistical convenience basis. It's not really divided based on the popularly known economic blocs. Like for example, in Africa, you've got the EAC, you've got the ECOWAS in probably the western part of Africa. So this one is purely statistical. And to find out more information, all you have to do is to Google the United Nations geoscheme. You'll be able to see how each continent is subdivided. So specifically for Africa, once you look at the five of them, we're going to be identifying the cardinal, which in each case is the strongest nation economically in that region. So in essence, we're saying in Africa, we've got five cardinals. And this is just my coined phrase borrowed from the fact that the compass has the points north, east, south, and west, and we've also got the center point. Then you've got the silent contender. So here, if the cardinal is the strongest nation, the silent contender is essentially the number two, the one who is probably trending in a similar direction or better than the cardinal. And in essence, what you're trying to answer is, are they significantly positioned to usurp the cardinal? Some abbreviations and acronyms to keep in mind. We've got the UN for United Nations, GDP for Gross Domestic Product. We've got the USD for United States Dollar. We've got EISA, which is the Electoral Institute for Sustainable Democracy in Africa. I'll speak a bit more on this a bit later when we're looking at the data sets. Then you've got the IMF for International Monetary Fund. So to start, but the UN Geo scheme we earlier mentioned, Africa has five regions. So we've got Central Africa, which has nine nations, East Africa, which has 18, Southern Africa, which has five, Western Africa, which has 16, and Northern Africa, which has six. So this will be important because essentially this will organize how this is going to determine how we're going to analyze this problem moving forward. So our quest, first we're going to identify the cardinal in each region. So this is the economic leader essentially. And then we're going to comparatively identify the silent contender. So in essence, we're trying to rank these nations per region based on these economic metrics, and we're going to find the number one and the number two. And then we're going to infer from the data how well positioned the silent contender is to usurp the cardinal. So, just high level, if the cardinal is far above the silent contender, then we'll just say that the cardinal in this region is extremely dominant and their position is not really threatened, in the grand scheme of things for some time. But if you're seeing that the silent contender is trending in a similar way to the cardinal, or is even trending better, or is charting better, based on the different metrics, then they're probably well positioned to usurp the cardinal in a little while. Could be a few years or so. Now, the metrics that we analyze, because we're looking at this from an economic angle, is we're going to focus on population size. So this one is just a high level way to look at the size of human capital. So how many people per country, because it's of course strength in numbers. As for how that scales to actual value generated, that would differ based on so many other things. So because the scope of this is restricted, we're going to look at the population size high level. After that, we're going to look at GDP and debt to GDP. So, of course, GDP is how much this nation is domestically producing annually. Then, one thing to note here is that our time horizon for this is the year 2013 to 2024, end of Q1. So for most of these metrics, publicly available data is from 2013 to end of 2023. And then for the case of metric number five, which is the USD Forex rate, we have data that have managed to consolidate up until end of Q1 this year. So just to make sure everything is uniform as we compare everyone. So we've also got inflation, and here the metric is CPI, inflation, consumer price index, because inflation could also be calculated in different ways, and it's also calculated differently in different markets, or also it depends on the context that someone is trying to compute the inflation. And then, as I've mentioned, we'll have the USD Forex rate. And then finally, we have the year of next presidential election. Now, this one, you might think it's not really economic, but if you think about it, the interplay between politics and economics is very high. And so it's important that we look at how far the next election is, because that could be an indication of stability or potential volatility. A simple example is if a country has its next election in a few months, then if it's there's a high likelihood that the government changes, then maybe some of the policies that were in place in the former regime might change in the incoming regime. So things like that could affect, of course, the position of a cardinal or the position of a silent contender relative to the cardinal. So it will just be important to glance at it once we identify for each region who is the cardinal and who is the silent contender. Our objectives are as follows. First, we analyze the data to quantify each metric for each region for each nation per region, sorry. So here we're just trying to, on all these metrics, analyze the data, see the trends, see the quantitative aspects to it, and anything else that we can infer from the analysis that we do. Then after that, we'll rank each nation. So what I've done is I'll rank everything so that you're able to see in descending order who is the highest and who is the lowest, because that will help us to isolate now the top two nations for objective three, sorry. So we can compare and contrast the differences. And then again, now, as we mentioned earlier, try to infer the position of these two relative to each other. For our dataset sources, these are some of the key ones. I will probably publish the code I used to essentially organize my data, my whole ETL process, and I'll publish that on my GitHub. So I'll try to make that available after this video series is up. So this is just to give you a sense of where the data came from. So to start, we've got World Atlas has a really good way. They have really organized the charts for the different regions in Africa, the nation. They give you descriptive information about the country, each country, the capital, main cities they're in, and other information you'd like to find out. So be sure to check that out. We've also got the UN Geoscheme I mentioned earlier. You've got the EISA, which I talked about in terms of its ability to give us democratic information. Now, that's important because, again, this one was very important to give us the year of next election, but it gives you way more than that. It gives you the year of past elections. It also gives you the different types of elections in each African nation, because the governments are organized differently. So it will tell you when is the next presidential election, for example, when is the next gubernatorial. In the cases where some countries you have a different day for a presidential election and a different day for the gubernatorial one, maybe Senate, maybe members of parliament, all those things. And of course, elections do have a very significant impact, which I alluded to earlier, the interplay between politics and the economy. Then you've got worldometers, you've got the IMF, you've got World Bank, and you've got investing.com, which was key for getting the Forex rate data. So now that we've gotten to the end of this one, if you are paying attention to the cities I mentioned earlier, you might probably infer the order of the regions in which you'll start. Because simply put, how I'm going to do this is Each chapter after this is going to cover one region. So we go region by region until we reach the end. And so if you're paying attention, you already have a sense of the order in which I go. But not to worry, let's go through this together, see what interesting insights we find. And until the next one, see you in chapter one.